All right, good afternoon. Coach Slack here. I was trying to get the grass cut, but the weather's not cooperating so far on this Friday. It's been a really wet, rainy day, so I'm going to look to combine two things that I enjoy a lot. Number one, reading, which everyone knows, and sauna session. So, being a wrestler from the 90s, I spent a lot of minutes in the sauna. And one thing I enjoy about it at my age and having my own home sauna is being able to drink lots of water while I'm enjoying the sauna time. So anyhow, the reading I'm getting into today is a book I'm really in love with. It's a compilation, again, the Philokalia. So Philokalia is a Greek word, and the translation would be, I think most accurately, love of the beautiful. But like I've mentioned before, one of the beautiful things of the Greek language is that it often comes with double meanings and probably even multi-meanings. With love of the beautiful, or it could be, the beautiful could also be interpreted as the good. So again, that gives you the context, what is truly beautiful, in this cultural, linguistic sense, the good, So love of the beautiful. The complete text was compiled by Saint Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain and Saint Macarius of Corinth. And these were two fathers who lived on the Holy Mountain, and they started to come across various writings from, Holy Fathers throughout the ages. I think their compilation spans from about the 4th century to around the 14th century, I believe. So they found, around 1,000 years worth of writings and tried to assemble it into some kind of order in a compilation. This book right here is volume 3. I have 4 volumes that I know of in English. I've heard of a 5th. I don't know if it's been released to the public, in production, but I've heard of it, and I heard it was completed. I don't know if it's just undergoing further editing or has been published yet. I've never found it, whether in a store or by ordering. Translated from the Greek into the English by G.E.H. Palmer, Philip Sherrard, who I think are both passed, so if that's so, may their memory be eternal, and Bishop Kallistos Ware, who's definitely still alive. So they've worked diligently for decades to bring us this in English. If you're like me, English speaking only, this has been very helpful. So today in volume 3, let's see, I got my bookmarkers. This is, let's see how I get this to focus a little better. There we go. My wife's high school graduation placards. I found a whole box of them, so I like to use them as bookmarks. Got about 15 of them in here today. So in volume 3, I'm going to focus on St. Peter of Damascus. Real quick introductory note. The works of St. Peter of Damascus occupy more space in the Philokalia than those of any other author, with the one exception of St. Maximus the Confessor. So that's an important point. The works of St. Peter of Damascus were written between the 11th and 12th century. So a little historical context there. One of the first things that I want to point out here, this has hundreds of pages of just St. Peter of Damascus, but one thing I had highlighted previously that I'd read, without humility, I will gain nothing. So again, we find that, everything starts with humbling ourselves and finding a constant state of humility. So that's obviously an important point. I like this title of this chapter. It says that we should not despair even if we sin many times. Okay, so how should we interpret that? Say you're not super theologically minded, but we all go through these phases and these psychological states of being, especially in this lockdown situation we find our in, and a lot of division politically and these types of things. So a lot of people have looked inward and they're feeling themselves having anxiety. And one of the things that you may start to become aware of is this. Even if you are not what you should be, you should not despair. So there have been many times in my own life where, you know, like say I'm reading spiritual readings, or I'm at church, or I meet someone who's just really inspiring, and I'm like, oh, you know, there's a little part of me that says, oh, I wish I wouldn't have wasted so much time. You know, I wish I was this, I wish I was that. You know, I'm not where I should be or where I could be, you know. And it can be, you know, you can start to get, you know, let despair creep in. But despair is something to be avoided at all costs. That is just one of the things that brings us down the most. So what St. Peter's saying here, he writes, even if you are not what you should be, you should not despair. Okay, so that's an important encouragement there. Okay, if you're not where you're at, you just start right then and get on that path again. You know, just pick yourself back up. This is really cool. You know, once on the Holy Mountain, I met a father at one of the monasteries, and we talked about 3 motivations. And if you've been around me either in a wrestling room or in person, I've probably brought this talk up, or this encounter, this meeting I had, this experience. And, you know, he taught me the only 3 motivations, and the way he worded it was fear, reward, and love. But anyhow, I'll read what St. Peter says here, because I see a correlation in their teachings. Men are of 3 kinds: slaves, hirelings, or sons. Slaves do not love the good, but refrain from evil out of fear of punishment. This is a good thing, but is not fully in accord with God's will. Hirelings, so people that have been hired to do something, love what is good and hate what is evil, out of the hope of reward. You know, they're hired, they expect payment, right? But sons, being perfect, refrain from evil, not out of fear of punishment, but because they hate evil. And they do what is good, not because they hope for a reward, but because they consider it their duty. Okay, so I think that falls into that talk I had with that father about the 3 motivations. Fear, you know, he's saying slaves, you know, are being fearful of punishment as one of the motivations, you know, which has its place in the world, but it's not fully in accord with just love, you know. You know, people that want reward, you know, if you go get a job, you know, a lot of times we're not getting the job because we love what we do, we need the money, right? But then there's the sons, you know, if you're called, if this is my father and you're my son, it's a different kind of relationship. And if it's founded on love, you know, you will refrain from evil, not out of fear, not for reward, but because it's your duty, because you love it and you believe in it. So I thought that was a good point there. Oh, this is a good one even for my wrestlers. For anybody, really. For there is nothing that so readily prepares one for victory as bravery combined with a firm faith. So if you want to prepare yourself for victory, have lots of bravery backed up with a firm faith that you're going to succeed. And nothing so readily prepares one for defeat as self-centeredness and the cowardice that comes from lack of faith. So if you become too self-conscious, too self-aware, too self-centered, and you have no faith truly backing it, you're just doing it for vain reasons, like I want to be a state champ because I want other people to look at me and say that's a state champ. If that's your reasoning, you're probably not going to succeed. You know, and even yourself, you're going to doubt yourself because you're doing it for the wrong reasons. You know, if you're doing it because you have a firm faith that you can do it, and you're brave enough to endure that which takes to do it, then you'll find the better rewards. And there is no better instructor in courage than diligence and experience. So we build up ourselves by diligently gaining experience, nor in clarity of thought than spiritual readiness, or nor in clarity of thought. So to get clarity of thought, spiritual reading and stillness. He says here a couple things that we've heard before. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. So he's quoting scripture there. And that is, so St. Peter goes on to say, you know, you should love every man. And I remember another lesson I had on the Holy Mountain. A father said to me, he says, you know, Brian, do you understand the message in the cross? And it said, like, love every man. And he said, do you love every man? You know, it's a long story, so I'm abbreviating it. But he said, do you love every man? And I was like, I think I do. You know, I hope so. And he said, what about the murderer that you see on TV and things like that? How do you feel about him? I said, oh, that's tough. How should I feel about him, Father? And he said, you should have the same love and compassion for him as you would anyone. And that's a tough concept to, because some people do some evil things. And so that's what he was saying. He said, that's still, God's child. And you have to have more love and compassion, not more, but equal as you would your own brother, but probably even a lot more compassion because, people are in such a fallen, evil state. So loving every man, Peter says. This is a good one too. The same medicine is not suited for all, even when the illness is the same. So my personal examples of this are, I remember after I built a relationship up with my elder, and we were going around and I was asking him all kind of questions and he was answering them and he would give me these answers, and I was like feeling so much better. At least I had some direction in these lifetime questions I had about who I was inside and decisions I had made and want to make and where I'm at. And then we went into, like, he would be asked to do these bigger talks and I'd be his companion along the way, and these would be interpreted into English, so I would hear them all. And we sit down and someone would ask the same questions that I had, just because we're all the same. Humans are very much the same, dealing with the same, situations since the beginning of time. And I would hear him give, like, the total opposite answer that he had just told me about the same question. And so finally, this happened a few times, and I got in the vehicle with him when we were driving away, and I said, Yolanda, I said, I said, why, you said this. He said, different people, everyone's different, motivations to get us to the final destination happen in different ways. So the same medicine is not suited for all, even when the illness is the same. So that was an important lesson for me to understand, because it's not just like always cut and dry, 1, 2, 3, ABC equals this. And we got to be careful we don't fall into that trap. Like, if I only follow all the 10 commandments, I'll go to heaven. That's wanting a reward, and that's following the rules, and that's a good thing. It's not bad. But if it comes without, like, let's just say love, then you're a clanging cymbal, right? Okay, so move on and spend a lot of time on that. So these are taking a while. There's a lot with St. Peter, and I got a lot of notes, so I don't know. He says here that knowledge is given to anoint the intellect, to strengthen us in the keeping of the commandments, and to help us in the practice of the virtues. It is also given that we may know how and why we practice the virtues, and what we should do and what we should not do. So we're always asking ourselves, what's right and what's wrong, right? I mean, we know what's right and wrong inside, but, sometimes there's tougher decisions than just cut and dry answers, right? So this is, why did God create knowledge? It was given so we know how and why we practice the virtues, and what we should do and what we should not do, okay? So that we avoid condemnation. We're up to 158 in here, so going pretty good. So it looks like, okay, we're 13 minutes in. It's going to be like a 20-minute video, so if you're in. Oh, when I started wrestling with virtue, first of all, it was inspired a lot by this particular reading. So you'll see here on page 203 a list of the virtues. So this is what I reference when I'm giving my lessons at my sports program, my wrestling program, on the virtues. And he lists here altogether 228 virtues. He says, a quick note, he says, to acquire all of them as possible only through the grace of him who grants us victory over the passions. So 228 virtues, right? And then immediately following, he has a list of the passions. And he explains that since God created nothing bad, the passions, which are bad, and the virtues, which are good. So the passions are just misuse. Well, humans have free will, and we misuse the virtues given to us, and that's when they become passions. And he lists 298 passions, so they can multiply from the same virtue being misused, or multiple virtues, or the lack of virtue in our own lives. Another one here, he says, all that we are required is to love God and our neighbor, to love our neighbor, to endure patiently what befalls us, to make use of things according to their true nature, and to refrain from committing evil. So that's some good advice. How about this one? You wish to have no fear of the authorities? Do what is right, and you will have their approval. So he's quoting scripture again there, St. Paul in the letter to Romans. But it's like, if you don't want to get in trouble, don't do bad stuff, illegal stuff, right? Then he said, detachment from material things gives rise to the contemplation of spiritual realities. So if we're attached to like money and cars and our image and clothes and shoes and all these types of things, we're being distracted. You know, we're obsessed with politics. You know, we're obsessed with youth sports. You know, whatever it is. You know, we have addictions. You know, we're attached to material things that are going to just dissipate, right? But when you detach from those, it starts to give rise to the contemplation of spiritual realities that really do exist. But you're not going to see them if you don't quiet your senses, so to speak. This is a great one. The fuel, because you know how everyone says, you know, and we all know that everything starts with humility. The fuel of humility, so if you're looking how to build up humility and be humble, you know, a little bit of fuel to that is gentleness. So if you want to be humble, start by being gentle. You know, a lot of us wrestlers off the mat could learn about that. And then he goes on to humble us. He says, remember, what do you have that you did not receive from, you know, somewhere else? You know, what do you have that you did not receive? Always remember that. And this is important, you know, for people battling addiction or passion or anything like that. Because I think addiction and passion can be you know, in our day and age, those are pretty synonymous, I think, obviously. But the fact that we have served the passions from our youth and have practiced virtually every form of malice and fraud with complete willingness and zeal means that it is impossible for us to be freed from such evils and to see things as they truly are without effort, time, and God's help. It is indeed impossible unless we devote ourselves to the acquisition of the virtues as once we devoted ourselves to the passions. So, you know, this is an important lesson, and I received this also once. You know, I used to think anger, the passion of anger was just, it made me such a bad person, right? And then one time finally a father said, he said, look, he said, it's not your greatest enemy, it's your greatest gift. You know, you're just using it in the wrong way. And my presbyter said to me once, to drive this point home, we were talking about this very talk that I had with this elder, and she said, yeah, she heard something similar once, and it was a great story. She said, you know, a shepherd has his staff, and when the wolf comes, he doesn't beat the sheep. You know, he goes after the wolf. It's to chase the danger away, the evil away. So our anger is to give us a powerful emotion for strength. Against what? Against wrongdoing, against evil, against failing, you know, not against good or our fellow human beings, you know. So, so as equally as we devoted ourselves to our hang-ups, you know, if we take that same amount of energy, so as passionate as we are, you know, as passionate as we were in our bad things, if we can turn that to good, we're going to be equally as passionate. That's why they also say in the Bible, be hot or cold. Don't be lukewarm. If you're kind of like saying, I'm doing the right thing, but you're kind of like secretly doing the wrong thing, you're lukewarm. You're playing both sides of the coin. You're straddling the fence. You know, you're either totally against it and don't believe in it, or you're totally for it and hot for it and believe in it, and you're going all the way. Don't be lukewarm. So turn that same amount of energy that you put into your passions and get it done. He says, even threatened with death, we should not deviate from this purpose or action. Oh, he points out St. Gregory of Nyssa, who's awesome, I've read his letters, said that birds and other animals rejoice because of their lack of awareness, while man, being endowed with intelligence, is never happy because of his grief over his self-awareness, I would add. He doesn't say that, but that's pretty cool. And then he closes up, well, he doesn't close up with this, but this is the last bookmark I have for tonight. For it takes much time, and I tell my students this all the time, but let me read him first. St. Peter says, for it takes much time to make a moral... All right, sorry about that. I'll edit this in to the end here. If you're wondering how long your phone lasts in about 170 degree heat, it's about 19.5 minutes. So anyhow, St. Peter says here, for it takes much time to make a moral virtue effective in ourselves, while what has been achieved with so much time and effort can be lost in a single instant. You know, this is a lesson that I give my students a lot. You know, even if it's athletically oriented, you know, your strength and conditioning, you can work, you know, 5-6 weeks, you'll start to see some gains. 11-13 weeks of consistent training, you start to see serious improvement. And yet, you take 2-3 weeks off, and it's like you're starting over. You know, so consistent effort is so important. You know, all that hard work, you got to always remember, you know, I can't take a day off because a day off leads to a week off. Now, when you're sore, injured, you know, days off can entail different things. But, you know, if I'm resting, maybe I'm watching film. You know, maybe I'm sitting in a sauna. Maybe I'm taking an easy jog on my rest day, you know, something like that. But you're never taking a day off, right? But, and then I also tell my students, especially at the junior high and high school levels, you know, decisions that they're making, they're not so much under their parents' protection anymore. You know, when you're 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, it's limited how much damage you can do to yourself with the decisions you're making, you know. But when you get to 13, 14, you know, 16, 17 years old, I tell them, you know, decisions you make can affect the rest of your life, you know. The wrong substance, getting in the wrong vehicle at the wrong time, you know, these types of things that teenagers face, these temptations and these challenges. And the worst fear of all parents, right, is, you know, anything bad would happen because of a stupid mistake of a teenager. You know, they don't set out to make stupid mistakes, but, you know, idleness and these types of things. So I always try to remind my students, you know, takes a long time. You know, even your reputation. You know, you could have a good reputation your whole life, and you do something that's really just stupid, and that's what you're known for a long time. So, you know, it takes a long time to build up good things, and in a very short time, bad things can happen. So we got to stay consistent. Oh, there goes the phone.